One final slide before we get into the ethics discussion. I think this is an interesting discussion in our textbook, this notion of integrative thinking. It's unfortunate that they feel like they have to trash the old way of thinking as if it was so bad to lend more credence to their idea of integrative thinking. But what I want you to see from this is if you look at the chart and you look at the elements of integrative thinking, I think many of you, not all based on the results, but many of you have been doing this very successfully in BSG, and that is probing for the deeper answers, looking for the root causes, recognizing that things are interrelated. So much as we want to say, well, it's all very simple. In reality, things usually aren't simple. They are complicated, and it's those who sit down and figure out the complex relationships and the levers that are causing the majority of the impact, where you fix those things, that allows you to go off to fix the second and third and fourth order things to achieve that mystical fit that will really allow you to optimize your operations. I want to close the discussion with about of strategic leadership by talking about integrity. Students tell me all the time they are sick and tired of hearing about Enron, and I understand that. So I want to share with you a story that was kind of peripherally my personal story, which is to say I just knew one of the people involved in this, and an incredible story of ethical breaches, the price that is paid, how we got into that situation, and then we'll talk about what do you do to try to avoid the situation. If you look at the picture, the gentleman on the left's name is Michael Sears. And this story, shockingly to me, is getting a little over 10 years old, but it's a great, like I say, personal reference. At the time, he was the chief financial officer for Boeing, which you may not realize has a huge defense contracting side of their business in addition to the commercial airplane business. The lady on the right's name is Darlene Druyan. Miss Druyan was, and regrettably I have to say was, based on this case, one of those genuine American success stories. After she finished high school, she entered, or she didn't enter the Air Force, she began to work for the Air Force as a civilian in an administrative post. Along the way, picked up a college degree and progressed rapidly through the ranks to the point where when she retired from civil service in 2002, she was the senior acquisitions official in the Air Force. And if anybody understands what that really means, I would be surprised. But that probably made her, next to the Secretary of the Air Force, the single most important civilian in the Air Force senior hierarchy. The acquisition side is the people who buy all of the stuff, whether it's the routine stuff to letting the multi-billion dollar contracts for new airplanes and missiles and the like. When she retired in 2002, she went to Boeing, went to work for Boeing as the vice president on their missile defense side. Although she didn't have any particular expertise in missile defense, one of the rules about leaving government service and going to work for contractors, you couldn't basically go into a parallel position. So she went into missile defense because that was something where she didn't have any tie. About a year after she was hired, both Sears and Ms. Druyan were fired from Boeing for alleged ethical improprieties. And that ethical impropriety was that she had conducted job negotiations with Boeing while she was still the senior acquisitions official, which means she was making decisions about which contractors got contracts and the like. Was an incredible allegation that was just unbelievable. This is ethics 101 if you're in government service, that you can't use your government service to feather your bed, to step out into the private world. So I have to tell you, a lot of people said, I just can't believe that it's true. Well, about 9 months later, she reached a plea bargain with the Air Force, or with the federal government, and said, yes, I admit that I did conduct illegal job negotiations with Boeing prior to me stepping down from my position in the Air Force. Her sentence was agreed to be 6 months, and as a part of the plea agreement, she had to cooperate with investigators to tell everything she knew. Well, at the sentencing, about 6 months later, she was sentenced to 9 months. And I didn't even know that was possible. How do you do a plea bargain and agree to 6 months, and then when you actually are sentenced, you get 9 months? Here's what happened. Over the course of the summer, she kept failing lie detector tests. And when she finally came clean, she said that she had, over the past several years, tipped several major defense contracts to Boeing as a reward for them hiring her daughter, her son-in-law, and then attempting to pave the way for her lucrative exit, eventual exit from the Air Force into Boeing. This is unbelievable that she would do this. So what's the price that she paid? Well, she lost her job at Boeing. She's a convicted felon because I believe she pled to a felony. And I don't know for a fact, but she probably lost her federal pension, which would have been fairly substantial. And then she basically becomes radioactive material to anybody in the aerospace or defense industry. So she, in essence, is unemployable, all because she violated her sense of integrity. Boeing didn't get off lightly either. Yes, they fired Mr. Sears, but they were ultimately fined $615 million for this and another ethical breach involving a defense contract. But it got worse for Boeing than that. They went under a microscope and they lost several major defense contracts that they were thought to have won, to include the one for the next generation tanker, which they lost to Airbus, not even a US corporation. Now, Boeing contested that. They had to rebid it, and eventually Boeing did win on the recompete. Well, let's talk about how you prevent ethical breaches like that. It's a balancing act. If you get a lawyer involved to the nth degree, then you're going to end up with a book of rules that is certain to hack off your best employees and almost incite them to commit ethical breaches just as a way to thumb their nose at the man. By the same token, if you get too lax and assume that everybody is just going to act ethically, you don't create sufficient barriers to prevent this unethical behavior. In the case of Ms. Druyan, there were a couple of posts that were unfilled when she was tipping some of these contracts, to the point where she pretty much had ultimate authority and solo authority on those, whereas normally there was a system of check and balances that would have caused some of these decisions to have been questioned. So there was a system where some of the guidelines were not in place that allowed her to get away with these things. But trust me, I think we've all seen it. The ironclad organizations don't always go so well either. And because of that, you have to cultivate ethics as an explicit culture. Talk it, live it, breathe it, talk it a lot, and then walk it a lot. And so you have to maintain very high ethical standards as a strategic leader. And the thing that's interesting about this is perception becomes reality. You don't have to do anything wrong. If people perceive you've cut the rules, then it's as bad. And because of that, as a strategic leader, you have to be very careful to steer yourself away from gray areas. And I want to tell you now that you may think, oh, I'm just an MBA student, what difference does it make? You are setting habits now for the rest of your ethical behavior across your career. If you are fudging on stuff now, guess what? If you ever get into the big jobs, you're going to fudge there too, and it's going to cause problems. Because trust me, the temptation to fudge things becomes extremely great when the stakes are very high. So you have to have your ethical muscles in really good shape. And then you also have to make sure you're not setting up a reward system that incentivizes unethical behavior. And that's hard to do in a lot of cases. So here's an ethical dilemma for you. Boeing was levied with that $615 million fine. Turns out fines are tax deductible. So if you're the CEO of Boeing, would you take that $615 million fine as a tax write-off, knowing that based on corporate tax rates, that's going to mean about $150 million, give or take, to Boeing's bottom line that year? That's something we may discuss a little bit further later. So to wrap it up, we've talked about a topic I'm very passionate about. What is it that strategic leaders do? Trust me, it's a great job. You want it. And all that goes with that, setting a direction, designing the organization, building the right culture. Talked about Mintzberg and what does your day look like when you're doing that. And then finally, really strong encouragement from me. Integrity is the bedrock on which you are built. Don't give it away. Look forward to seeing you in class.